Welcome to another special show brought to you by the lovely Miss Queen PR and me, Brian H. Waters. Hey, how are you?
I am so good.
So good?
I'm so good. It's a good time. It's a good week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a very exciting time in wrestling, I think, too.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of new ventures and new everything, really.
Yeah, it's been a while, maybe a couple months since you and I have sat down and recorded some content. Just you and I.
I do enjoy creating content with you.
Oh, thank you. I think I enjoy more because, you know, I invited you first on my platforms.
That is true.
But, you know, today we're going to discuss some wrestling documentaries. In particular, to be fully transparent, we're going to discuss a lot of them in the upcoming weeks. But today we're going to discuss one particularly that we just watched, and that being about Vlad the Superfan. But before we get into that, let's just talk about wrestling documentaries in general. Because one thing I don't think I've ever asked you, do you remember the first wrestling documentary you watched? And I should say, was it as a child being fully into wrestling from a kayfabe standpoint? Or was it during the time you came back to wrestling and went down this deep rabbit hole of research?
It would definitely be more when I got back into wrestling. I would say 2013, 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I would watch most of them on YouTube or Netflix even. There was a lot of WWE docs on Netflix at one point. And I think the first one I remember watching, which is crazy now, is the resurrection of Jake the Snake, I think.
Woo, that's a good one.
And I was like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like, what the fuck? And then, of course, WWE are like, I think the king of documentaries. They definitely know how to repackage their intellectual properties into really good, riveting stories. And so I went all in on the network. Like, I watched everything. I remember, and it's so funny because you could use the term documentary because they had the shows like Rivalries, which was like individual kind of documentaries about, I don't even, if you would call those documentaries per se, because then you go from like the kayfabe standpoint of those or blurring those lines, and then there's the resurrection of Jake the Snake and Dark Side of the Ring and like that other kind of the realism side. So there's like so many. There's a range of what you would consider wrestling documentaries. So I think I've probably seen almost all of them. and they all kind of stand out for different reasons. But I think that was the first one I remember like watching and really being like, okay, wow.
Yeah. I think the first one I remember, I think it was when I bought the one about Survivor Series. It was like the 10-year anniversary or something like that, 87 and 97. I remember the thing, if you remember Sam Goody.
Wow.
And I think the thing was when I went in the store, it was like, get this, and never before seen footage from the 97 Survivor Series. At the time, this was probably like late 88, late 98, early 99 when I bought it. I didn't know the Montreal screw job would take up 3 months of my life in the future. But I remember buying it and then watching it. And I feel like that may have been like the first actual like wrestling documentary I watched that wasn't on like a Dateline special. Gotcha. Or you remember when there was always this thing they was trying to tell you not to do it at home, and they would always blame wrestling for like a child's death. So I remember that. And then around 2004, 2005 is when I really started going in on collecting the DVDs. So like you bring up Netflix, and I remember by the time I got Netflix, a lot of the stuff I had already had on DVD. And I can kind of tell you like, and maybe one day when, you know, you actually see the collection, the physical, I can kind of tell you the errors of the way they was produced. Because I remember around that 2012, 2013 era, they wasn't missing. That's when they redid Austin's rocks.
Yeah.
And I remember like this is where we really start to know like Triple H has a higher position backstage. And the joke was like when his King of Kings DVD came out, like, oh yeah, his was going to be perfect. And because it was like one of the best ones. And then Paul Heyman's came out and it was like, wow, like everybody would sit there and watch it. And you felt like he was getting a history lesson.
Yeah.
You know, which as I'm talking, it was like, man, you know who they would have a great WWE produced documentary?
Cool.
Jim Cornette.
Yes.
If they let him just go in.
Yeah. I don't ever see that happen. Well, maybe like unfortunately, like if he passes
Posthumously,
away.
Yeah.
Yep. I feel like they would definitely do that because he's one of the most fascinating people in wrestling to me. Like he's absolutely problematic in so many different ways, but he is a wrestling historian to like the highest extent in my opinion, and has done like almost everything in the business. So even having him be a part of documentaries, you know, you're going to get some good insight. Yeah, for sure.
1,000%. That's why I always love talking to you about him. Because you always can see it both ways. Like, yeah, he's problematic, but let's not take away all that he offers. And, you know, Dark Side of the Ring being a favorite of ours, you hear a lot of those crazy stories, but only he can tell it. Like he's going to give us the insight, as you know, you mentioned on a piece that you did about Sonny and Chris Candido. We wouldn't have learned that if it wasn't for Jim Cornette. And
that's true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah,
and I want to get into maybe one day like the familiar faces or talking heads that we see in these, because that's always very interesting. Like just as a documentary fan in general, I always take note in like who they include to talk about certain things. And I always look to see like if they wrote a book or, you know, who are they to be like speaking on this. So that's always an interesting aspect. And then the difference between, like, I'm so glad that we have shows like Dark Side and the new A&E docs that are produced a little differently, because it's nice to hear these stories told like outside of WWE's lens, because, you know, they are going to be biased towards how they tell stories. And, you know, that's, you know, not a shade on them. That's just like business. Like, of course, they're going to point certain pictures a certain way and kind of hide the dark sides of things. So I'm glad that now we can kind of have like both sides of that.
Or, you know, when we watched earlier this year, the Teddy Hart documentary, how WWE wouldn't go that route for a superstar that problematic. They would just like get rid of it and call it a day. But they went, you know, so far that I believe some of the parts of the case may have been reopened. You know, and I think back and
that was
I know
a WWE doc.
Nah, it had, but that's the thing. It wasn't. I think it was like it might have had like Kevin Dunn's name on it, but it was more like independent. And I could be, but yeah, I'm pretty sure
that could have been. And that is a good segue into the story of Vlad. And I was reading up a little bit on that doc, and they were going to sell that to a third party streamer. They weren't going to put it on Peacock or the WWE network at first. Even going back to 2021, this doc was made and produced. But that could have been the same thing with the Teddy Hart doc, where WWE was going to produce it in house, because it is a production company, an entertainment production company at the end of the day.
Yeah,
and if they can sell their content elsewhere, I can so see that happening. So that probably is what happened with the Teddy Hart one. And Kevin Dunn, another person, but like is very good at like what they do.
yeah. Yeah. Let's get into it. Vlad's doc. Now, can I be honest?
Of course.
I'm on Peacock, and you know, I remember, like always, one of us sees a documentary pop up, and we tell each other. That's kind of breaking down the fourth wall. But you know, it was like, hey, you seen this? Okay, we're watching it, and I'm like, I've never heard of Vlad.
No.
And you know, I'm not going to be somebody to say, oh, I've heard of every major wrestling fan.
You're not a wrestling expert? You don't know every piece of wrestling history ever?
No,
I'm shocked.
I do know that WrestleMania was also Colossal Tussle was on the
Wait, that was a list of a potential WrestleMania name? That
Yep.
is so bad.
Imagine, hey, we're going to Colossal Tussle
We
this
would
year.
not be here right now. Like, we just would not be here right now.
Yeah. But I do know that was a thing. But nah, it's funny because somebody said the colossal list of pay-per-view names. But I didn't know. I know about the Superfan who dresses like Superman.
I do see him. I do see. There's a lot of like super fans that are at like every show. The green shirt guy.
Yeah.
There's
Frank
these
the Clown.
guys. Yep, that dress like the New Day. They've just like they're just like everyone for the most part.
Yeah,
they do a really good job of it.
Exactly. But Vlad, I'd never seen before. But I thought the story was beautiful.
It was so beautiful. And it's not a long doc. I didn't see it coming. I didn't know, that it was supposed to come out before and it didn't and all of that. I had no idea. So it was a very new story. I remember it dropped and we were like, oh, okay, well, let's put that on the list. But it was a very, very beautiful story because it kind of represented like all of us in a way of just those diehard wrestling fans, where it just means so much to you and it is so important to like who you are as a person, and you don't mind going to shows every single show, like, when you're, and his energy was like on 1,000 with, that they showed, to the point where the wrestlers recognized him and were like friends with him, and he made friends, waiting in line for tickets at the Garden.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. One of the things that I could appreciate about him the most was he wasn't gatekeeping.
No.
And when you see, like you said, making friends, you see the other gentlemen in the dock, and you see them become friends. Where like, okay, we're going to be at every show together. 30 plus WrestleManias, man,
that is
dream.
Insane. And we're about to go to 40.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been to 30 plus.
Yeah.
Shit, he helped Roddy Piper find a partner for WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Or was that WrestleMania? I'm not sure. But they definitely showed us that what scene was that for? Was that getting ready for?
It was it was a show. But I know exactly what you're talking about. And it might have been just a house show or
yeah.
But yeah, him having that, just being, there were special moments, and you even see like Kevin Owens and the newer generation saying, oh yeah, we watched you as a kid. And it's like, he's just as much a part of the show as their favorite wrestlers, and you imagine like when, I know a lot of times, like if you're a Knicks player, right. And you grew up a basketball fan, you can't wait to have Spike Lee cheer for you.
Yes.
And that's what he was.
It's a part of it. It's like you become a Nick and then you made it. Like, you're like, yes, like it all fits. And I'm sure Vlad is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm. But one of the things this definitely touched on too was the pandemic.
Right.
And I know that was tough. Just, that part, because you think about, unfortunately, that's a part of our lives that we'll never forget.
Crazy. But it's still so like new and fresh.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Oh, 1,000%. We're not even 5 years removed. And we were children when, 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
And you being in New York and I'm being in Baltimore, totally different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then us being on the East Coast, because, Baltimore, I'm still about 45 minutes away from the Pentagon, but then take it for somebody from the West Coast, where I don't even know if they even shut anything down, where Baltimore was shut down. Obviously New York was shut down. So we have that experience, but then we have the pandemic experience where, as adults, how was we living? What could we do? What couldn't we do? Having a curfew. And we talked about just like how wrestling was there. And by this time, we know each other through, you know, content creation. We've built a friendship and, you know, just kind of like staying on social media, communicating, hey, you good? You know, I know at that time I'm looking to see what type of content you're putting out and, you know, but I thought that was one of the things it captured well because, like you said, we're fresh in this. The thing about documentaries is they live forever. So 10 years from now, you watch this again, you're like, oh man, I remember
like the
exactly
pandemic was crazy. So it just like also hit on just how we could relate to the story of Vlad. You know, a super fan going to shows every week. It was like his lifeline. And then it got taken away from him during the pandemic. And that's something that was, you know, really hard for him. Because what do you do? What do you do? You are always, you work, you know, 40 hours a week and you travel to every city and you go to every show. And then all of a sudden you just like cannot do that. So for us, it was the same thing. Like it was, I had just got back into going to shows regularly when the pandemic happened. You know, we had so many plans. We were going to go to WrestleMania. We, as in me and Krista B, as those wrestling girls, we were going to go to everything. Like we were just so ready. And then boom. Nothing. And the normalcy, I've said it on our shows all the time, the normalcy of still being able to watch wrestling twice a week was probably the thing that probably just saved my whole, you know, I'm not going to say the pandemic wasn't hard, but that ritual, being able to keep up that ritual, you know, really helped in so many different ways.
And I think they did a great job even pointing that out. The fact that we did still have wrestling. And I remember a lot of people was criticizing WWE. How can they put their wrestlers in danger? I can't remember. I'm almost certain they had a choice, or at least a lot of them had a choice. Obviously, we know Roman Reigns.
I'm sure they did. And I think for the performers themselves, the normalcy of being able to work and wrestle, even though it was a huge adjustment for me, like emotionally watching wrestling without fans was very jarring. And it was a 316 reunion anniversary episode with no crowd, and it's so uncomfortable. I can't even watch those clips of Stone Cold in a ring with no crowd. Like it is almost like, what? Like this doesn't even seem right. And like everyone involved, you could tell where they're like, this is just so new. But again, like, thank you for putting your life on the line and still doing that. And speaking of 9/11, WWE was the first company to throw a large in attendance, you know, event. Live crowd gathering, thank you, after 9/11. And that was another source of, again, the normalcy of it, like knowing, okay, Monday night or whatever night that was, wrestling is going to come on. And then also we have an outlet to be like, yo, this is crazy. You know, let me see familiar faces and familiar characters. Because at the end of the day, wrestling is, you connect with the characters and the stories. And it's almost like why watching like soap operas is comforting, and, you know, sitcoms and that kind of thing. It's the same thing. So Vlad just kind of showing like how special that is again. Like it makes you, like I say all the time, how jaded you can become as a wrestling content creator, especially if you're active in the IWC. Like it can become like exhausting and negative, and you kind of almost forget, like, especially when you're in the grind and you do it like as a day job. You know, you talked about having to go into the Montreal Screw job for 3 months because you were working on Book of Wrestling podcast. So like, you know, you get jaded where you're like, oh my God, I can't, you know, whatever. But then you watch
me venting.
Huh?
You remember me venting to you? Like,
yes, it was a couple because you were doing it was about catchphrases. So then you had to watch every single piece of material that in context of the catchphrases and stuff like that. Go check that out on the Ringer if you haven't, because it's still there. It's really good content. But that specialness of it, like where you're reminded that pure joy that you see when they show him at shows in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and house shows, like his energy is always on 1,000, and that pureness of it all. Like it's so special. You're reminded, like, wait, this is why I even do this. Why I want to make a living creating content about wrestling. It's that special moment, that special connection that you have, with the crowd.
I'm so glad you brought up the IWC, because that was one of the things that I could appreciate about him. Was there was no IWC-esque discussions. He was just a genuine fan. And that's what I love. Like, he was a fan who loved professional wrestling. He loved going to the shows. And you could see the wrestlers also appreciated him, because at the end of the day, it felt like he just knew his role. And that was to cheer the ladies and the gentlemen on who were in the ring, putting on a performance. Being a part of the show is, booing who he's supposed to boo, cheering he's supposed to cheer, or, cheering his favorites per se, but not so much, and that's probably the reason why I didn't see him. You don't see him on Twitter trying to rebook the show. Or they should have did this. He probably had those conversations.
Pointing out botches and like all that ridiculousness.
And I thought it was very cool that they gave him a plaque and stuff at WrestleMania, because at the end of the day, like, you look at it, it's like, man, this dude, he's responsible for, he's sitting front row. So he's paying top dollar, at least at one point. Maybe not so much no more.
I'm sure at some point he got some comp. I hope. But still, like, this is what he dedicates his life to doing.
Yeah, he's getting merch. So, it's like, even if you don't pay for the seats, you're getting some merch or something. So, I was happy, happy to see them do this. And,
me too.
I don't need a documentary about every quote unquote super fan or expert.
But I think, but his story was definitely more endearing than probably most.
Yeah.
Talking about his mother, being a single mother, being a Haitian immigrant. Like, I'm also glad that they touched on the fact that he was Haitian.
Yes.
Because, that's just another example of what the wrestling fan looks like. Like, they're not just all middle America white men, what it may seem. It's everything. And that was his outlet. That was his escape, taking care of his mother. Like, that was his escape. And, she sadly passed away. And he really clung on to wrestling. So his story, and just the fact also, like, you kind of can see why people were endeared to him. Like, he seems like a very genuine soul, and very, even his picture on the poster of the documentary is very endearing.
Yeah.
Very sympathetic character.
You're good. You're right on the head. Wow. Dang. I'm like, I looked at it and I'm like, wow. But for somebody who's not a wrestling fan, what would you say to them on why they need to see this?
I would say to see it because it has that everything that you would want in that type of story. Because, like, all you have to do is substitute wrestling for baseball or something of that nature. Like, it's always something that's special to people. And sports is something that's really cool because it's ongoing. So that's something that you can get passed down from your father or whoever. And then this is what you do. And you can make a tradition out of it. So you don't have to love wrestling or even love WWE to get this documentary or to feel that feeling. And I think just also people speaking so highly of him. So this is like a really good guy who loves this thing and does it in honor of his mom, who just, and I read too, when he had learned of the documentary, he had watched it when it was done a couple years ago, and they were in WWE was figuring out where they wanted to release it. If they wanted to release it on Peacock, WWE Network, sell it to a third party. And he said that he hopes it comes out because it was one of the most beautiful pieces of, film that WWE had ever done. And he loved it. And he really wanted to get his story out there because he's also getting older and was having health issues at the time. So fans wanted it to be released, so that he can see it. So, and then he ended up releasing a statement saying how much he, you know, appreciated it and thanked the crew and everyone that made the movie come together. And, you know, because it wasn't an easy thing to get it out. So yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Any final thoughts before we close out?
I would say to check it out, especially if you grew up a wrestling fan and you're sometimes jaded by the WWE product or even just everything. It's can be considered oversaturated at some points, and depending on your relationship to consuming it, you know, you want to remember like the purity of being a wrestling fan and the connection and the emotional attachment that you can't really explain to people that don't understand or people that don't love wrestling or even people that think you're like overdoing it. And it's like, okay, yeah, really, like it's that special. Like Vlad is us. Like he says everything. The story portrays all of those emotions. So definitely go watch the story of Vlad.
Vlad is us indeed. Queen PR, this was a pleasure as always.
It was.
Let the people know where they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Queen3_PR. Make sure you follow those wrestling girls everywhere as well. Subscribe on YouTube. We stream on Twitch weekly. We're going to be throwing events. So follow us everywhere. Check out my new show on the US Sun platforms called Top of the Rope Tea. It is a ever evolving project, and I cannot wait to talk about the process of that, because being a wrestling fan, being a Black woman in media, in sports media, you know, whatever, is not easy. So make sure you check that out. All the love and engagement on social media really, really helps. So, and I want to thank everyone who's already supported the project, and the Sun for the opportunity. So yeah, check everything out.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It's one of my favorite things on the internet right now. She's going to say I'm biased, but I'm just speaking
extremely
the truth, because it's very well put together. You do such a great job in letting people know what's trending in pro wrestling and what people are talking about, and even finding those stories that people, you know, kind of slip through the cracks, you know, like Ric Flair's drink having mushrooms. So make sure y'all check that out. Catch me on The Masked Man on Mondays and Breaking News Thursdays as well. Coming soon. Maybe not. But I think that's coming soon. Luckily this is for Patreon, so they get it first. But also check me out on the Wednesday Worldwide each and every Wednesday. But then after you do that, you can spend your whole Wednesday with me, right? Check me out there in the afternoon. Then come join me, led by this beautiful lady right here, Queen PR, and the crew, including myself, Justin, and Seindole on TWG Fan Club, and then close out the night with the Wrestling Realm Now podcast. So follow me at Brian H. Waters on all social media platforms. And Queen PR, thank you as always. And
I can't wait to talk about more documentaries.
Want to give them a preview of what we're going to talk about?
Yes. You want me to spill?
Yeah, you can spill.
Okay, so we are going to be... So we are going to be reviewing almost all of the notable wrestling documentaries, books. We're also going to be talking about our journeys in this wrestling journalism game, and any sort of things that we can talk about that we've gone through that can inspire everyone in this content creating game, or just someone that just wants to kind of just push forward in their careers. I don't know how much you want me to spill.
That's enough.
Okay. Because I was like, you know, because I'm excited. I love new projects and I'm excited. So I was going to go in.
Yeah, but we gave him a little bit. Can't give him too much.
Yes.
But until the next time,
thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. Thank y'all. All your support, continued support. And we got some good things coming for y'all. That I promise. So long, everybody.